Very pleased to be joined by Queens City Council member John Liu. He is chair of the Council Transportation Committee, but more importantly, a candidate for New York City Comptroller. Welcome to CityWide.
It's great to be here, Ken.
Job of Comptroller, you audit city agencies, you approve city contracts and procurement, you are the chief, but not sole, investment officer for the pension funds. So which of those functions get you most excited?
Well, the job of the controller is, as you know, very sexy and glamorous. There are lots of things that the controller is responsible for. And you've highlighted basically the three major responsibilities. So I'm running for controller because it is a very difficult time. And we need an independently elected watchdog, someone that will really keep an eye on the bottom line, make sure that the funding, the city budget is actually used for the purposes it was intended for. And there's also a golden opportunity now with an economic stimulus package coming our way to not only make sure that the funds are used for the purposes they were intended for, but actually create opportunities, and opportunities that will be afforded to all New Yorkers equally.
Give us an example of that.
What gets me excited, and this is the example, is that when we have such a large amount of funds coming in a relatively short period of time, of course it will be my job as controller to make sure there is no waste or even fraud for that matter, but that in the process of directing those funds from the federal government through the city agencies, through ultimately whoever gets the contracts, that the jobs created will be for New Yorkers. That will be my #1 priority. I've already seen a little bit of a disturbing pattern where the funds are seemingly going through the same agencies that have a tendency to contract out to a relatively small number of companies. Large companies, companies that don't always hire the people within the city of New York. I want to make sure that the contracting process, in fact, allows far more minority and women-owned businesses, the small and upcoming businesses that are, quite frankly, more likely to hire within our neighborhoods. That is the kind of stimulus that President Obama talked about, the creation of opportunities, the creation of jobs.
Well, let me ask you, because there's three notions in what you just said that I want to ask you about each one of them. The first is the amount of the stimulus money, the allocation to the city of New York itself, not what is going through the state, but the city of New York itself. While it's got a lot of zeros in it compared to the city budget, I'm not sure it's that much. I mean, the Brooklyn Bridge alone is a $300 million project that's taking up a good chunk of that. Second is the charter seems to put procurement pretty squarely in the hands of the mayor, with the controller basically dealing only with integrity issues. And even beyond that, if you're going to take a job like a $300 million rehabilitation of the Brooklyn Bridge, there probably only are a handful of companies that are qualified to do it.
The $300 million contract is, you can manage those contracts in a way that allows many different companies to take part. So the subcontracting obviously takes place at a very high level. And so we have to make sure that, sure, the overall manager, there may be a limited number of companies to do that, although I know that there are far more companies capable of doing that than have been given the credit for doing that. But the subcontracting is something that could create thousands of jobs in the neighborhoods within New York City. The city controller does have a great deal of leverage over the procurement process. Technically speaking, you're right, Ken, that it's at the end of the day that the controller checks for integrity issues and makes sure that everything is kosher before actually paying any money out. That's what's written in the rules. That is the minimum that a city controller must do. As controller, I will really take that to new levels. There is obviously a great deal of potential for interaction with the Mayor's Office of Contracts, with the city agency involved, with OMB, to make sure that, in fact, it's very clear to all the pieces of city government that get involved in the procurement process that I, as controller, will be looking for all these things to have been met, to be satisfied, integrity and otherwise. And that's the complete set of requirements that need to be fulfilled before I, as the controller, would allow these contracts to actually be paid out. So there is a great deal of interplay, and it takes a bit more proactivity, and that's something that I can't wait to sink my teeth into.
Assess the performance of the incumbent, Bill Thompson, City Controller, the last 7 years, now Democratic candidate for mayor. What did you think that he did particularly well? What would you do differently?
Well, Bill has kept our city's finances in good shape. It has been up and down quite a bit in the aftermath of September 11th. Things were very difficult for quite some time. Things got a little better. Now we're back on the downside. Controller Thompson has managed the office very well, has raised certain priorities in the city, some of the contracting, both inside and outside the Department of Education. He has also talked about minority and women-owned businesses, which I think needs to be a much higher priority within the city of New York. It is already a higher priority in other major cities. It's really shameful that New York City is leading many other major cities. But what he has not been able to do, I should say he has not had the opportunity to do, is to look at the stimulus funds, because they are really coming through just about now, and they will come through at least for the next couple of years. Controller Thompson hasn't had that opportunity. Whoever the new controller is, and I hope that will be me, will have really, I think, possibly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, certainly a golden opportunity, to see a pie that all of a sudden is far larger, and a pie that has to be directed to feed as many mouths as possible.
But is it actually a lot of money as these things go?
Yes, I think it is. Even one project at $300 million, that's a lot of jobs. That's 3,000 to 5,000 jobs right there, and that's just one project. And I don't think the end of the stimulus package is seen yet. There could be much more in terms of capital needs that then get approved by Congress.
Tell us something about your background. What prepared you for this job?
I'm running for this job because in the last 8 years, I have loved every minute of being in the city council, being an elected official, being able to speak out on issues and having an impact, and I want to do more. And based on my professional background, immediately before I was elected to the city council, I was a manager at a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers, which was intensively financial all the time. And I want to use that professional background combined with my knowledge of how the city works now to continue to work for the people of New York, and I think I could do that best in the office of the controller. My previous profession, and I spent about 14 years in that field immediately after graduating from university. It was a good field. It was all about financial aspects, economic forecasting, budget modeling, and cash flow analysis. It's the kind of technical training that will allow me to really help prioritize and shape the day-to-day activities of the Office of Controller, as well as keep an eye on the big picture. And it is always going to be the big picture that I look at. At the end of the day, of course, the bottom lines have to be watched, and I will watch that. But I won't get too involved in the details while losing sight of the big picture. The big picture is the reason I ran for office in the first place to the City Council, to make sure that every New Yorker has a voice, that equal opportunity abounds in this great city, that nobody is left out or locked out of the process. Unfortunately, I do feel that still sometimes happens, that people are excluded.
Give us an example from your tenure as transportation chair where you use those financial skills to highlight a problem.
Well, there have been a number of instances that I can cite that I'm pretty proud of in terms of being able to point out inefficiencies or omissions or inaccuracies. I think there has been a tremendous level of numbers games being played at the Department of Education. Just a few weeks ago, there was a big discussion, a hearing on charter schools. Whether you support charter schools or not, the Department of Education was using statistics that really did not actually support charter schools. For example, the idea that, there are 30,000 families and kids on waiting lists for charter schools, that somehow indicates the success of charter schools. I don't think that indicates anything at all. The first question I asked them was, well, what are the waiting, how many people are, or how many kids are on the waiting list of some of the top high schools or some of the newer schools that have opened in the last 10 years? The response was, oh, they don't keep a waiting list for those schools. In the past, I've caught them on double counting the creation of new school seats, where they would count the number of seats in the so-called new schools that they were creating, but those new schools were actually going to be resident in existing school buildings, and they would really double count the number of seats. Those are numbering schemes that it's important to hold city government accountable for. My proudest moments come with the MTA, one of my all-time favorite agencies, where a number of years ago I was the first elected official to catch them on the 2 sets of books that they were holding when they were trying to justify a historically high fare increase. They were using one set of financials that showed them with a terrible, terrible financial position, and then another set of financials for the exact same period with the exact same kinds of things being measured. But of course, that was far more favorable because they were using that set of financials to justify their bond ratings.
So when they wanted to borrow money, things were great.
That's right.
And
when they wanted to charge people more, things were awful.
We're going to continue our conversation with City Councilmember John Liu on CityWide right after this.
These things we count on every day started as ideas. Ideas from the minds of African Americans. Support minority education today so we don't miss out on the next big idea tomorrow. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're talking politics with City Councilmember John Liu, a candidate for controller. You used an interesting phrase that people are left out or locked out of the political process, and that was part of your focus as a council member and what you wanted to do as controller. In following the political reports about the campaign, I've noticed that you've started to build somewhat of a coalition of communities of color, elected officials, Black and Latino, supporting you. And I have to tell you, as somebody who lived through the Korean boycott in New York, the flashpoint that eventually led to the Crown Heights riots, where the African American community and the Asian community were at odds, I find that a fascinating development. So tell us what kind of coalition you're building and how did it come about?
Well, it is about coalition building, and that's how I won my campaign for city council in the first place. I represent a very diverse district. A district that is known for an Asian American presence, but in fact is actually very diverse. And it's the same kind of diversity that I want to project in the entire city of New York. I think there is still too much emphasis on differences and not enough acknowledgement or accentuation of all that we have in common. And the fact of the matter is people do have a great deal in common. The issues of concern are schools, our safety in our communities, our quality of life, housing costs, health care. These are the issues that bind all of us, no matter what the top 1/8 of a millimeter of our bodies are comprised of. But over the years, I have been involved. I've had the fortune to get involved in a number of issues, and many of the issues have surrounded my role as an officer of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus.
Which wasn't an Asian caucus until you became the first Asian American council member.
Yeah, it's still very shocking that there was no Asian American serving in any legislative office in New York until 2002, and I happen to have been that person, and so the caucus was renamed. But it's been about these issues, and as I talk with people about these issues and reached out to elected officials and communities that I have worked with the most in my nearly 8 years in the city council. I guess in some ways it's somewhat coincidental that things broke out that way. There are many issues that are more pertinent to communities of color that have been at the top of my priorities as a member of the city council, and will be at the top of my priorities no matter what office I might happen to hold. But I'm reaching out to everybody, Ken. I have secured the support of a great deal of elected officials, unions, establishments, really people from all across the city.
Well, one of your opponents, David Weprin, has won the endorsement of former Mayor David Dinkins and former mayoral candidate Fernando Ferrer. Your support has come from elected officials who were elected over the last decade or so. Is there a generational shift going on in politics and in leadership in those communities?
Well, I am totally and completely jealous that Dave Weprin was able to secure the support of Mayor Dinkins and near Mayor Ferrer. I'm certainly not a part of the old boys network, and I don't know if there's any generational shift going on. I happen to be the youngest person running for controller now. I don't have very long relationships with any people in office. In fact, I don't have any political background before I was elected to the city council. I had noted I came from the financial sector. My degree is in something called mathematical physics. So the extent of which I've been in politics is still very limited. And I actually pride myself on that because I think that I have a perspective that is different from the perspective that my rivals have. They have been in government and in politics for quite a long time, nearly their entire careers. I've had a career in finance, and a number of years ago I decided to run for city council. So as far as a generational shift, I think there is a different thinking nowadays, but again, I'm totally jealous of those endorsements.
You know, I was thinking in preparing for the show that all of the controllers that I can remember going back to Abe Beam were residents of boroughs other than Manhattan at the time that they were elected.
Is that right? Wow.
Beam, Golden from the Bronx, Holtzman from Brooklyn, Hevesy from Queens, Thompson from Brooklyn. Some of them moved after they were elected. All of the mayors in that same period of time, with the exception of Abe Beam, but from Lindsay forward, all from Manhattan.
Really?
And now in your race, all four candidates, again, outside of Manhattan. Is there something about the role of controller? Is it supposed to be a voice against the Manhattan elites? I mean, or is it just a coincidence?
Well, being in finance and professionally, as you may know, I am an actuary. I would have to say that the sample size is not statistically credible enough to make any conclusions from that. But the fact of the matter is the controller, that position will be vitally critical in the years to come, especially when we have budgets being slashed and an economic stimulus package coming our way. We need to have somebody in there that's going to be an independently elected voice. Of course, the mayor is important, the city council is important, but we need someone in the controller's office that will be that independent voice. And I've shown that I can be and I will be that independent voice.
So let me ask you, I want to focus for a minute on one of the key functions of the office, the management of the pension systems. And we're going to talk about some of the controversial aspects of that in just a second. But as the controller, you set the lead for policy. Folks may not know, unlike the state, the city controller sits on a number of boards. There are representatives of the mayor and unions involved with that. It's retirees from city pension funds that are involved. Should the controller be an activist in this time of financial crisis, where we're dealing with the aftermath of risk-taking by large financial institutions, many of them headquartered here in New York? Is the job of the controller to use that power to be a social activist, or is it simply to make sure that the most amount of money is available for city retirees?
The controller should be active and proactive. The first and foremost fiduciary duty is to maximize the returns on those pension and benefit funds, and that goes without saying. The fact of the matter, though, is that we, in the modern-day economy, we are at a near-perfect market, which means that in every single asset allocation, there are a multitude of choices to choose from. And so you can make sure that all your investment holdings are on what's called the efficient frontier, maximizing investment returns while balancing the risk involved, and therefore maximizing the benefit for those pension funds without going into any socially unconscientious investments. And I think that the Comptroller of the City of New York has a great deal of influence on social policy as well. And he or she should do that without sacrificing the returns on the pension funds. As an elected official here in New York, there is already the bully pulpit. We have the greatest media in the country, if not the world. And any elected official has that pulpit. The Comptroller, a citywide elected official with enormous powers, will be able to magnify that pulpit many times. Combine that with the leverage of $100 billion, on the order of $100 billion. I think we're down to about 80 now.
It depends
but
on how the
it'll go up
market
and
is
down,
doing, yeah.
That's right. We'll check the market close today. That is a huge amount of leverage that you can exert over corporations. When we have corporations behaving badly with regard to ridiculous executive compensation, to policies that take society back to the 1950s and even the 1920s, where people are not treated fairly or equally, those are policies and issues that the Comptroller absolutely should be proactive in, and I will be that.
And what about people who try and leverage the office? There are now indictments pending against any number of politically active figures for getting large amounts of money for steering pension funds to certain investment vehicles.
Well, that is a no-no, and that should be done away with. There is no need for these middle people, essentially brokers who are taking a commission or cut. When you have these middle people involved, it automatically takes you off that, what I had said before, that efficient frontier of investment return versus risk. It's not necessary. The Comptroller, and I certainly would have this, a cadre of professional fund managers on staff that can direct the investments towards the places that they need to be.
So we just have a minute left, but tell us how you're going to win this race.
We're going to win this race by pulling out the vote. We have a tremendous amount of community support and endorsements, more so than anybody else, from elected officials, from political clubs, and political clubs are still important to generate the vote, and also labor unions. And most importantly, I'm getting out there on the streets, talking to people one at a time, 10 at a time, 100 at a time, and delivering my message that I want an inclusive New York and one that is going to provide opportunities for years to come.
My thanks to Queens City Council member John Liu, candidate for New York City Comptroller. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us in this edition of CityWide.